So, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Shift Book Club. I'm Sam Baker, and I'm thrilled to be here in my kitchen with Esther Freud to talk about this month's book club pick, My Sister and Other Lovers. And don't know what it looks like. Here it is. Is it the same cover in the States, Esther?
It is actually, although they've switched it round. The title is Below My Name in the States. I think that's the
Broadly the same.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's it. That's what it looks like if you haven't bought it yet, and you're going to. Esther trained as an actress before publishing her debut, Hideous, Kinky, in 1992, a semi-autobiographical novel loosely based on her childhood. I'll say that again. Loosely based on her childhood, it was an instant hit, shortlisted for the John Llewellyn Rhys Prize and made into a film starring Kate Winslet. After publishing her second novel, Peerless Flats, Esther was chosen as one of Granta's best young novelists. She's since written eight more novels, the latest of which is My Sister and Other Lovers. Sort of sequel to Hideous Kinky, it takes us back to those much loved characters 10 years on, plus a bit, as you'll discover when you read it, and explores the relationships that entangle them and asks if we can ever move on. It's been variously described as frank and tender and unequivocal by Miranda Cowley Heller, who's the author of The Paper Palace. Spare, moving, and beautifully written by book club alumni Jojo Moyes, and an impressive success by The Times. So, Esther, thank you so much for coming to the Shift Book Club. We're really thrilled to have you.
It's a real pleasure to be here. My first
And
book.
I'm so grateful to you for fitting us in because you were in Australia until Monday, weren't you? And you're heading to Edinburgh Festival, I guess, tomorrow.
Yeah,
So,
it's been a busy few months, that's for sure, but very gratifying. And yeah, I'm glad to have managed to fit it in.
and so how has the reception to My Sister and Other Lovers been?
Um, it's been it's been really heartwarming. I think because for the last few weeks I've done an event almost every night in Australia, traveling around from city to
Oh
city.
Lord.
I know I've really spoken to a lot of people, and I don't think when I was writing it that I had any idea that the topic of sibling relationships and the intensity around the love and complications one can have for one's sister, particularly that's what the book deals with. I didn't ever imagine it would strike such a chord, and people were just sort of opening them, spilling out their hearts to me about their sisters that they couldn't speak to, or the sisters they loved or lost, or the difficult relationships and the happy relationships, asking me to sign books. My favorite one was for two little girls who were sisters, called Poet and Sunday, or possibly Poem and Sunday. So that I love
Wow.
it when I'm signing books, collecting up all the names. So Poem and Sunday, definitely my two favorites so far.
Oh, I bet she has some hard time at school.
Who knows? Maybe they
Yeah,
that kind of school.
yeah, yes, probably. Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because I'm not a sister. I've got a brother, and
Oh,
I've always been quite envious of people with sisters. I mean, for everybody here, can you pop in the chat if you're anybody who is a sister or has sisters? It would just be interesting to know the mix. I've always felt quite jealous of people with sisters. What was it that made you decide to go back to the characters of Hideous Kinky after all this time?
well, this was books come to you in such different ways, but this one, I have to say, it didn't really come to me until about 2 years into the writing of it. When I finished my last novel, I Couldn't Love You More, which we spoke about, I remember,
Yeah.
book club. But um, I had a novel in my mind that I was desperate to write, but it coincided with the pandemic. And so many writers have said this, but it just didn't seem relevant. It didn't call to me in the way that it had and the way I was expecting. So instead, I wrote a short story, and it came very easily, and sort of it's what you dream of as a writer, because it's so rare that things come easily. But this short story just kind of flew out of my fingers, and it was basically Lucy and Bee traveling with their mother through Ireland, just at this critical moment that I don't think I'd ever thought so much about until I wrote the story. Just as the oldest daughter B is about to leave home, and the younger daughter, the narrator of the story, is about to become the oldest child in the family, and the whole shift of the family makeup is about to change. And I was really, I found myself becoming really interested in this subject. And then I wrote another few short stories, still thinking, what am I going to do? I haven't got a novel. For the first time since I started writing 35 years ago, I didn't have anything I felt burningly in need of saying. I actually went to a talk a few years, well, I was writing this book by then. Jeff Dyer was talking about, he said, yeah, sometimes writers have nothing to say and they say it anyway. And I thought, that's me,
Yeah.
that's me. But it turns out that actually I did have something to say. I just didn't know what it was. So anyway, I wrote a collection of short stories, and I realized that there was something interesting in the stories, and every so often the narrator's sister appeared, but then nothing else in the stories hung together in a way that was satisfying enough for me to want to publish it. So that's when I thought of the title. I thought, a book about sisters and lovers, and the deep love between the sisters that underpins the story. And I actually texted my own sister Bella and said, My Sister and Other Lovers. How about that for a new title? And she came back and said, yes. So I began again, and that's how this book evolved. I know that you said, tell me about how it evolved as a sort of as a sequel in a way to Hideous Kinky. How did I decide to revisit the characters? At this point, I decided they weren't the characters. I changed their names. I gave them license to go off on their own journeys and tangents. And it was only when I'd actually finished pretty late on, I thought I'd finished. I gave a few people early readers drafts, including my sister. And she said, what is it with these ridiculous names? Own it. Lucy and Bee tell their story. And then I did a really quite a significant new draft. And the book, that's when it really came to life. So I had no idea what I was doing, is really the answer to your question.
So they fought their way out, really.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that it probably wouldn't have been as interesting a book if I thought I was writing a sequel. I think I would have contained it in a completely different way. And as it was, the short stories added many elements, then turning those into a novel, giving the characters their own lives, and then drawing it back. It was like making a very, very, very long, slow cooked meal where you add little bits of rich sauce every so often. I think, even though it was, I have to say, quite an agonizing process, because I kept worrying hugely that it wouldn't ever add up. Ultimately, it was better for the painful journey.
Do you Did the fact it started as short stories, did that influence the structure, do you think? Because it is episodic, isn't it?
Yes, it's actually one of the things I really liked about it when I shifted it into a novel, and I was determined not to lose entirely. I did play with the structure quite a lot, but I didn't want to try and string it together too conclusively. So I hoped that my readers would understand, a little bit like when you meet an old friend. You don't have to hear everything that's happened to them. You really want the highlights. And so occasionally, I have to say, my editor or my agent would say, oh, give us a break. Just tell us a little bit, like, did 2 years pass? Or so occasionally it says, the following summer, or she just finished drama school, or etc. But I don't explain in each new chapter what happened in the intervening months or years necessarily. I'm sort of trying to treat my reader as an old friend catching up with somebody that they trust to tell them the news.
I really like that. I really like the way that some characters drop in and then you never see them again. And at the point they dropped in, you didn't know who they were, but you eventually do.
Yeah,
But you don't necessarily know who they are, and that you don't, everybody doesn't have to have an enormous backstory. And I love that about it. That kind of, like you say, it's kind of conversational, except you don't waste any words, which is something I'm extremely envious of.
I think it was interesting. I did a lot of editing on this book, and I think that was partly because it's not particularly plot driven. So it needed to be language driven. And maybe with my last book, where there was quite a compelling plot, at least for me, I was trying to work out how all the elements of the story, and I was racing through it all the time, trying to get to certain plot points. With this book, often when I was stuck, I would just rewrite and rewrite, spend days and days just sort of editing one sentence and then reading it aloud to myself, because I was quite lost in terms of what am I saying here? What's this about? I started to realize that what was most important thing to make the story suspenseful and work was to keep pulling the thread of the sisters' relationship. So if the sister didn't appear, if B doesn't appear in a story, she's always on Lucy's mind one way or another. And once I started to understand that, drop her into conversations, or just her absence into conversations, or into her thought process, or into her dreams, or anything, then the whole thing completely sprang to life. So, and I could only really find that out by this endless editing, which is why I think that it is quite a spare book. Because the more you edit, obviously, the more you cut.
It's interesting you say that because I hadn't really fully, I mean, I was aware of it, but it was very subconscious. And it was only really when I was going through my notes to make notes for this conversation that I realized that actually B is not on the page all that much, but she's there the whole time. And
Yeah,
that relationship absolutely subsumes every other relationship in the book.
yeah, it's so powerful. And there's one chapter particularly where Lucy goes with the boyfriend, or goes to visit the boyfriend that she's very in love with, Zach, who's working in New York. And in that chapter, B didn't appear at all, and it really fell apart. Every time I got to that chapter, it just didn't seem that interesting. And I thought, but it is a really interesting subject. I'm talking really about the sort of gaslighting elements in a relationship. And it had been based on obviously a short story, which had worked quite well. But in the book, it felt it just had something missing. And then I realized, she's forgotten about B. And so then I pushed B into the story with secondhand information, people are asking about her, and then Zach and Lucy end up having a row about B. And of course, Lucy takes B's side and is sort of completely shocked that Zach isn't under her thrall. And then suddenly the story worked. I mean, the chapter. I still think of them in part as stories because that's how they began. Not all of them, but that chapter particularly began as a story.
It's really interesting that you, right from the very start, when you realized that this wasn't short stories, that it was a novel and it was called My Sister and Other Lovers, that you sent that to Bella first. Is it your default to, do you and Bella interact in that way? Or was that because if this book was called My Sister and Other Lovers, then she was going to be so integral?
Yeah, do you know, a bit of both? Definitely, I need to share everything with her, ideally. Um, I've really woven a lot of these sort of compulsive elements of sisterliness into the book. There's a point in the book where something really difficult, very, very challenging happens to Lucy, and she can't get hold of me. And she feels as if, has it even happened if I can't tell my sister about it? So I feel that sometimes. But then there are other things in so there's that aspect. But also I needed to ask her permission in a way. I couldn't have written it, and I felt that if I was going to focus so intensely on a sister relationship, that I'd need to mind some of our own relationship, and I'd need to have her approval on that. I didn't think I would be able to write it if she didn't want me to. And as it was, she was really supportive and actually really pushed me to go quite deep and dark. And occasionally I would sort of pass her by something and say, do you think I'd quite like to try? How about, and she'd say, go for it, go for it. But then when it was finished, it was really important for me that she read it and I could go into its sort of publication with freedom and not worrying that she would change her mind. So that was quite a scary moment. And there were a few things that she said, no, you can't do that. And that was hard. But, I realized that it wasn't really about the details, as so much of the book isn't about the true details. It's about themes that I wanted to play. So with those, there was one particular chapter which I had to rewrite so unrecognizably. But I realized it wasn't about the recognizable story that she recognized. It was about something psychological and emotional that I was trying to say. So I completely changed the scenario and kept the detail. And kept the emotion. That was what was important.
And it's I mean, Lucy is, I'm going to start that again. I know that I'm on safe ground here because I know that you don't mind, because we've talked about this before when, the kind of conflation of your personal life and your characters, and many writers get very, I don't know, shirty about that. But we've talked before about the way that your life does intersect with your writing a lot. With Lucy is very much the peacekeeper in the family, isn't she? The kind of, in the three, she's the conduit. Is that something that you were writing from your own experience?
Yes. It definitely is something that I have written about before and that I feel there's a lot to say about. And I think that in so many families, there is one character who feels as if it is their job to try and cheer everybody up or to
Mm.
keep the peace or to make everything a bit better. And the better you are at it, the more addicted you become to it. And it's quite dangerous and quite, I think, quite defeating on some levels. So I wanted to show that Lucy has this capacity and that in some ways it works, but it doesn't always work for anyone or for her. So I think there's so much to be said about writing about the roles that people take on in their families. And I don't feel I've really looked at that so closely as I have in this way. And to go back to your earlier point, I'm a real champion of people using their lives in their work and running with it. Someone said to me that there was a famous quote saying, never be afraid of exaggerating in the direction of the truth. And I love that because it's like,
Great.
take something that's real for you, that's meaningful, that is your story, and diminish it, exaggerate it, do whatever it needs in order to make a story. And I do a lot of teaching, and I have often found that people undervalue something that they've written because it's recognizably truthful. And I say, no one cares. No one knows, apart from just a few people. But we don't know or care. But what we do care about is, does it ring truthfully? Do we hear it as authentic? Does it sing and fly? That's all that matters. So work with whatever you want to work with. Don't think, oh, I can't do that because it really happened. I'm really encouraging people to not undervalue their work for that reason and feel they have to write about dragons or whatever else that write about whatever it is you want to write about.
You Has anything that you've written ever upset anyone in your family?
Not fatally. I have. It's funny. I've got a really odd mixture that surprises me and confounds me sometimes. That I will do almost anything to make a story work, and there is that sort of splinter of glass, as they say, in the heart of the writer. I can feel it. I just think it's just too good. It's just too good. I've just got to write that down. But I also have a great desire and need to be on good terms with people. I do care. And the little splinter of glass or ice isn't there when I'm not writing. So I kind of I manage this, and I have upset people occasionally, but we've gone through it. And it's actually usually the publicity around what I'm writing that has been difficult, and not the actual substance of the book. Partly it's fiction, but then when I might write an article to publicize it or have a conversation about it or see the review that might attack a character as if it's real, as if the character's real, those are the kinds of, it's the fallout that has upset people, I suppose is what I'm saying. And that's harder because you can't control those things. But, it's not easy. Publishing a book is not always so very easy, and you have to be quite tough about the whole business. But if you want something to be good, it has to be a bit scary.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it's a conflict with your role as family peacekeeper.
I know, who'd have thought it?
Yeah, the peacekeeper is also chucking the grenades. How does that work?
Well, those quiet peacekeeping members of the family are often a lot more fiery than they let on. And so you just have many aspects to your character you discover. And I think that it's quite interesting. It's quite an interesting question. And I think that, especially in terms of birth order and the way that people take on their roles, and I always felt that I was born in the right order, that I was naturally a follower, a listener, a peacekeeper, and that my sister, who was the older, just by a couple of years, was the sort of fiery, outspoken, brave one, and that I would sort of trot along slightly in her glare of glamour. But I was learning and I was watching, and in some ways I was learning to be very tough alongside it. So yeah, there's so much richness in that subject, I think. And then there's always the children who are born out of order, in the order that doesn't comply with the way that we sort of imagine it. And sometimes you get a second child who just storms in and takes over. And yeah, it's just that's a whole nother subject that I'm quite interested in too. That you're sort of meant to be keeping your place and not doing things first. And Lucy, yeah, I think Lucy's aware of trying to buoy her sister up by keeping herself small to some extent while she waits for B to take her place. Yeah, I was amazed how much there was to say about the subject once I sort of got really inside it.
Yeah, I think I'm fascinated by birth order and how that influences you not just as a child, but for the rest of your life. And I mean, there's a Lucy, and is it, oh gosh, what's the character's name? Janie. When you say that they met up regularly to talk about the quandary of being the younger sister.
Yes, and what to do when it's already been done. And they both have
Yes.
powerful older sisters. And I noticed that a lot of my friends are younger. And I would say my partners, the important partners I've had in my life, have been the younger sibling as well. You're quite drawn to that familiar place.
Interesting. And would you say, not that you can speak for your sister, but would you say the reverse is true?
Good question. Very likely. I've never asked her, but now just coming to mind, having a little reprise, I would say it's very likely.
So it's interesting thinking about it because I am an older sister. I don't have a sister, I have a brother, and I am married to an oldest brother.
Right.
And it's not something I consciously thought about, but once you say, that's very interesting, isn't it? And it's interesting. one thing that really interests me is when Lucy talks about her way of rebelling. I think she talks about it anyway, but it's all a blur. About her way of rebelling being trying to keep people together. And of course, Bee's way of rebelling is to rebel in the traditional sense, if you like, which to leave as soon as she can and never come back. And but they're both rebellion in the context of their family.
Yeah, I don't know if Lucy sees that as rebellion. I think it just means so much to her. She feels she'll never be able to be entirely happy until these two people she loves so much are in some kind of harmonious relationship. It takes her the longest time to realize that that just might never be possible. She feels as if she can't quite let her breath go until she's managed to bring them together because she loves them both so much. And that whenever she's with one or the other of them, they're sort of slightly trying to pull her over, each one to their own side. So she's a bit of a pawn in the family. There's one point in the book which I suppose is another example of how Bee is always there. When she's sort of at a low ebb, she's stood up for herself to such an extent that her and Bee aren't speaking. But she's powerfully there, almost more so than when they are speaking. And she goes to visit her mother and her father, and they both say, "How's Bee? Have you seen Bee?" It's as if she isn't enough, and that of course they're just asking because they don't know where she is either. But it's so resounding, and she feels that she has to sort of be Bee as well as herself because Bee's so absent.
I mean, they do, particularly her mother, they do treat her like Bee's keeper in a way.
Hmm. I think that's the sort of, I'm sort of not within the book. I'm looking at sort of damage and fallout, and that section of the book is very much about addiction, and that's what happens in a family where there's an addict. And at that point, Bee's really struggling with dependence on drugs. The parents don't really know, or if they do, they don't choose to see it. And Lucy is a secret keeper, and so that's something that I am very aware of, and the idea that Lucy is the sort of keeper of the secret, which means she's the keeper of Bee, and so she has to say, "Oh, I think she's fine," over and over because she's promised she's loyal to her above anything, really. Ultimately, not going to talk about her with either of her parents. I'm hoping that will come for her. That's a
Poor
huge
Lucy.
I know, but the idea of I'm really interested in the whole idea of secrets and shame, and families are so often tied to these secrets that have sometimes been there for decades. Sometimes go to people's graves with them, and how it controls the family. And I think, oh, there's so much. Sometimes when I'm thinking about these things, I just find myself wanting to write a whole nother book on these subjects. There's so much to say.
I mean, secrets and shame were a thread as well that ran through your previous book, weren't they?
Yes,
And
very much.
it's one of the things that really interested me. It's what people choose not to see as well.
Yeah.
And that might be because of, the shame that's handed down through the Catholic family or, just what the people next door think. But, given the life that Lucy and Bee's parents live, completely
Yeah,
on their own terms and it feels with very little disregard to certainly in her. I mean, I think you gave her father 34 children in this book, but
that was only a query.
yeah, maybe 34, maybe just 14. But still the things that they don't see that don't suit them, and the impact of that on both their children, but particularly Lucy, because that's whose eyes we're looking through.
That's right. That's the luxury of being the writer, is you sort of tell the story through the eyes you've chosen to tell it through. And obviously, if everybody was telling their own version of the story, who knows what we'd hear. But I'm trying to sort of give you the whole world in the story by Lucy's ability to have sympathy and compassion for all the characters. So we get much better opportunity to see what's going on with them as well, rather than going into the other people's heads. You sort of hear it through Lucy's great desire to understand them.
She probably portrays them in a better light than they would portray themselves, actually.
Wow, that's quite a thought. Yeah, people usually, you often think that people want to portray themselves in a good light, but by no means that's the case, is it? People are full of recriminations against their self-recrimination or self-loathing or shame about their behavior. Lucy has a lot of compassion for them.
Yeah, because there are moments when, two or three times when she effectively, in order to stay in B's good books, she has to throw her mother under a bus, if
Yes.
more or less. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a very uncouth way of putting it. But, she doesn't want to say anything terrible about B to her mother, but she also doesn't want to badmouth her mother to B. But the only way that she can be in cahoots with B is to tell her a nasty anecdote about her mum, and then they'll both laugh and it will be,
Well, I'm sure we all have friends like that who they only
oh,
want
absolutely.
to hear a bit of nasty gossip. And sometimes you just don't want to go there. And so you kind of rather, it feels as if you're being rather prim and you sort of, you hold out on them. And then you think, oh, well, I'll just give them what they want because at least then it will be fun, we'll laugh, we'll be close. And I sort of there's one example in the book where I really use that. And then as we so often do, Lucy feels a bit bad about herself. She thinks, oh God. Or then she thinks, well, maybe I did want to throw my mother under the bus. She's quite confused by what she actually feels because her sister's so determined in her viewpoint that it often makes someone like Lucy, who's a sort of more of a watchful character, unsure of what she actually feels or thinks. And so she needs time. She does strengthen up and go on a journey. I mean, what was the luxury of, and I wouldn't have chosen to do this, I'm sure, if it hadn't started with stories, but just by chance, the stories that I'd written did go over quite a long period in a woman's life. So I started thinking, maybe I'll keep the novel over about 20 years and just jump cut from stage to stage. And I'd never have thought to do that. I'd probably given them a few years of life and focused in on one particular moment. But I didn't want to lose some of the later stories. I thought, no, they're quite interesting. Why not just try and tie this in? So that was actually a luxury, and it allowed Lucy as a character to change and grow and stand up for herself more and more.
No,
Yeah.
I really like that. I really like the way you've done the time frame because it allows, as you say, allows Lucy to really evolve and grow into herself. And whilst she's still ultimately the peacekeeper and the conduit between B and their mother, she, you gradually become more and more aware of what she wants and what she feels beyond keeping everybody happy, but also the way that I think, I can't remember who it was. I mean, I read a review that described them as vignettes. And in fact, Ellie has also described them as vignettes, but those vignettes are so detailed and intimate and close. But you know, so you've got that, but it doesn't feel like any of that detail is extraneous. And I'm sure it's, as you said, it's to do with all that cutting earlier. You've managed to give us lots of intimacy and detail without any waffle, which is very annoying of you. And maybe I will come to your course.
Oh, that, I mean, yeah, thank you. Nothing, it's hard to know what to say on that. I I do love an edit, and And I think that the structure of it did help me in that way, because I'm not sort of, it's funny, in some ways, and you described it earlier on as being episodic, but in an odd way, each chapter is incredibly contained. So it's less episodic in some ways than a normal novel, because we're not racing to get to the end. We're sort of held in the moment. And I think I was able to go deeper and use all sorts of funny little mysterious bits of dialogue that often have just been swimming around in my head for years. That's a real pleasure. It's one of the great pleasures for me about writing, is just to be able to drop something in. Years ago, I remember asking, in that slightly boring way adults do, I went round to see a friend, and her 8-year-old son was quietly drawing at the table. And I said, "Oh, how's school?" And he looked up at me and said, "A bit like school." And I thought, you got me. I'm going to think of something a lot more interesting to ask next time. And I just dropped that into the book. I was just writing something, and I don't know, just there it was on the page. That's something I get so much pleasure from, because it's not useful, that little thing that I, for some reason, have remembered for 20 years. But suddenly it was useful, and it always makes me laugh when I get to that.
It's so real, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah. And as I've managed to sort of scatter a lot of things like that through this book, because often there's not room for those memories because it's a historical novel or it's a novel about something so particular. But this one, it was sort of about human experience. So I found myself able to use so many little strange things that I'd remembered, and to sort of drop them in different places.
and you didn't have to do that. Yes, but does it serve the plot thing?
That's right, because
Which
it
is
isn't really a
so
plot, it's
annoying.
just life. It's true. It's true.
The epigraph, I think it is epigraph the right word? I think it is. The bit at the beginning, the quote
Yeah.
at the
I
beginning.
didn't want
That,
to call it, the quote. Yes, not sure. Yeah.
yeah, the Virginia Woolf quote, we think back to our mothers if we are women. Why did you choose that?
Um, I saw it maybe quite close to the end of writing this book. And I think that even though it's not necessarily so obviously relevant to be, it's very relevant to Lucy, that she's always
Mm.
aware that she is her mother's daughter, and she's aware of what her mother's been through and what her mother suffered and where her mother came from. And I think in a way, B is too, although she's denied it and, as you say, rebelled against it in a more traditional way. And I just wanted to link the idea that these two sisters are so fundamentally entangled with the legacy of their mother in such different ways. I think it just spoke to me. And I like the idea that the first thing you read is my sister, and the next thing you read is my mother or mothers. And so I just wanted to plant these two important words in the beginning of the book.
I remember when we talked about I Couldn't Love You More, your previous book. I was looking back through my notes and I had written that it felt like, I don't know that this was accurate because it's a while since I've read it, but it felt in a way like Hideous Kinky coming full circle because, Hideous Kinky being through, we now know Lucy's eyes, and I Couldn't Love You More as through the mother's eyes. And do you feel like, and this is a very random question, the answer may well be no, Sam, I don't feel that. Do you feel like this book, My Sister and Other Lovers, needed I Couldn't Love You More to be written before it could be written? Did that make any sense? It was a bit of unwieldy sentence.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I really believe that books breed other books. And so I wouldn't have written that short story if I hadn't just written I Couldn't Love You More, because it has the setting in Ireland of the previous book, and it has the same little bit of information, and it's only touched upon in that first chapter that comes into the sort of inspiration for that earlier book, which is that the mother has kept her children secret out of fear that, born into that particular time and society in Catholicism, that maybe those children would have been taken from her and she would have been punished for having children out of wedlock, to use that ancient word. And I think even though that doesn't come into I Couldn't Love You More, because as it turns out, she never gets to keep her child or hide it. You know, she goes and asks for help when she's pregnant, and she finds herself, you know, coerced into the whole system that we know so much about, unfortunately, in the last few years, of the mother and baby homes that happened in England and Ireland. But the genesis of that, which I wrote about at the time, was the fact that I learned much later that my mother had been really terrified as a young woman, to the point where she didn't tell her parents that she had children for a good few years. So that short story came very soon after publication of the last book. And I suppose it gave birth to this whole novel. And so, yes, in lots of ways, while I was waiting around for the good idea for my next book, it was actually already there, inherited from the last book. And that's happened to me a few times, where a book has led, usually not straight to the next book, because usually I do write the book I had stored up. And then I realize a book or two later, that one has given me a new idea. But as I couldn't write the book that I had planned, this one came much more immediately. And maybe that gave it some richness, because I hadn't moved on into another era or gone somewhere far away. It was still very much there. The characters and the atmosphere of a woman who is trying to live sort of outside the society that she was born into, the expectations that she was born into. She has turned her back on.
If any of you've got any questions for Esther, do pop them in the chat box, because time is getting on. It always just gets away from us. Esther, you've got, as well as Bella, you've got several half sisters, and a lot of your sisters are storytellers in their own way. How do you each handle writing your own stories without infringing on each other's?
When I was an actress, I used to be absolutely tormented by the fact that someone could actually have your part, and they did. And you'd audition, and someone would get it, and they'd perform it, and it was too late, and you were 2 years older, and it was when that play was done again, and etc. So as a writer, I feel really aware that no one can write your story. And it's amazing, but it's never been discussed among my other writer sisters. And it kind of hasn't ever really come up. It's just each one has a story to tell if they do. I mean, more recently, Bella has been writing these wonderful Sunday stories on Instagram.
Mm.
And she quite often rings me and says, asks me, you know, or discusses an idea, or even says, do you have any ideas? Or we talk about it. And I've loved reading them. And they sometimes cross over with my own life, or with even things I've written about. But it's fundamentally so different from her point of view. And she's writing non-fiction. So she's saying, in her own voice, she's talking about something that was important to her in the past, and how it led in some way to something creative, usually, because she usually begins with an image, and she's such a visual person, and she's writing around that. It's been so illuminating and made me laugh and occasionally exclaim, no, it wasn't like that. And I think, come on, come on. But I'm writing fiction, so I'm taking the seed of an idea and I'm running with it. So it's so different.
There are a few things that Lucy says in the book, you know, that Bee's childhood was almost unrecognizable from her own in regard to a particular Christmas. You know, that she wanted to be included in her memories, but not if they differed from hers.
Yeah.
And I did wonder how it was for you starting to seeing Bella, who, you know, in your role, if you like, as the family chronicler, you know, that was your like official, you had that official hat for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And now she's that she's doing her own writing. Like you say, it's very, very different. But is it strange to see experiences that you've lived through through someone else's eyes?
It is. It really is. As I said, it's taught me some things that I feel I didn't know about her. And sometimes she'll say, so there's one particular Sunday story where she takes a photo, she uses a photograph of me, my mother, and my sister, me and her, and our mother. And we don't have many photos from our childhood. People didn't have so many photos, and we particularly had very few. And we've just come back from Morocco, and we're standing in Trafalgar Square surrounded by pigeons.
Seen
And
that photo, yeah.
I've looked at that photo so many times, but the way she wrote about it, all through the clothes,
Mm.
I would never think to describe it. So she describes the way she's wearing these huge leather gloves and these androgynous boys' clothes, a black jumper and tiny little narrow black jeans. I mean, she looks much unchanged, I have to say. And she talks
Yeah.
about how, it was and how sort of androgynous and tough and sort of warrior like she was, and the idea that she might be putting her gloved hand out to catch maybe a kestrel, whereas I am dressed in a white rabbit skin coat, which I begged my mother to buy me in Portobello Market. We came back and we'd been in such a hot country. We were really cold, even though it was summer. And she bought me this little rabbit skin coat, which I loved so much. And I'm wearing a skirt and sort of polished shoes. And she talks about how her character is just so emblematic of her character. And there is me being the sort of precious princess daughter. And I thought, yes, that's who I wanted to be. I literally never thought about it. I've just looked at the photo and remembered the coat. I just always thought about the coat and how I kept it for years and years. And I didn't see it in a bigger picture. So I have to say, I think it's a bit of a luxury. And I just wonder, and she's never said this, how she feels reading this last book, where I mined so deeply the relationship. I think I feel an added, if it's even possible, an added closeness, that I've acknowledged it, and the great importance of our relationship, even though we often have acknowledged it. It seems to have brought us even closer. We talk so deeply about things, and yeah, it's been. I would say it's only been good.
It's funny you mentioned that coat because when she came on the podcast, she told me about that, about you in your little rabbit coat and your Mary Jane shoes, and
That's
her in her great big gloves and her boy clothes,
yeah,
and how much she hated the caftans in Morocco, and how much she hated that standing out, and she wanted to look, she wanted to strip all that away. But she definitely did talk about the little rabbit fur coat quite a lot. It's like,
it's funny, isn't it, that I was so inside it, and that I never thought how it looked to anyone else. I've always been more inside, and I'm the kind of person who would often. I'm much better now, but I'd walk down the street and my buttons would be done up wrong, or I hadn't noticed that the buttons were missing, or as very caught up with what was inside my head. And actually, she's been incredibly useful by giving me as we call the Bella Freud stare, the sort of quick, horrified up and down. And it's made me really
yeah.
make more of an effort. Even my friends say, oh my God, Bella gave me the once over. I'm trembling.
When I was a magazine editor, she used to scare the living daylights out of me, but she's
So fun, isn't it?
not so much anymore. She, um, so sorry, I'll start again. Where, your childhood, would you say that your sisterhood was very influenced by the kind of peripatetic nature of your childhood?
I think that because we lent on each other so much when we were very little, it gave us maybe an extra closeness than if we'd just been living a more traditional life and having we didn't have many other friends. We didn't have a huge amount of anything to distract us. And so we talked to each other. We told each other stories. Bella always says I told her stories all the time, but actually she told me stories as well. And we had a lot of word games. And I tried to, in Hideous Kinky, the words are based on a game that we used to play by always saying these words to each other and laughing about these particular words that we would use as a sort of code for when things were particularly strange or confusing. And in the new book, I use a song that they sing to each other based on the Jesus Christ Superstar musical, where Mary Magdalene sings about her great love. I don't know how to love him. And in the book, Lucy and Bee sing, I don't know how to hate her. And they've changed all the words. And so I've sort of drawn the thread tight of the way they relied on each other, often through language. And language, in the end, is the key to intimacy. And it's brought them close. And I think that is very much the case for me and my sister, that we needed each other maybe more than children from a more sort of settled family.
Were stories, because you didn't learn to read, did you, until you were 9 or 10? Were stories always important to you?
Yes. It's funny, I felt like I was always creating stories and thinking of the world in terms of stories, almost as if I was nostalgic, even as a 5-year-old, for life as it was passing. Because to my mind, our adventures in Morocco were so unbelievably interesting and exciting and strange. And I knew that we were having adventures. And I was sort of telling myself the stories. And then when I came back to England, I continued to tell myself the stories. I held them very tight. I was quite slow to get a grip on the present for a long time. I couldn't tell the time. I didn't know left or right. I couldn't read. I would wake up in the night and crawl into my mother's bed for the longest time. It was almost like I got quite stuck by having had such a lot of stimulation between the ages of sort of 4 and 6. I was in those days. Now I would be obviously diagnosed with mostly dyslexia probably, but then I was just considered to be vague and dreamy, which was reassuring. Because I didn't feel stupid, but I definitely felt I didn't have much of a handle on sort of real. I wasn't very practical. I didn't find it that easy to sort of make my way because I was so slow. But then I was very good at sort of making things. I was very good at school. I went to a Steiner school, which saved me to a large extent. And a large part of the curriculum was something called handwork, where you did, you wove, in order to learn to knit, you were presented, this is age about 6 or 7, with a sheep's fleece, which you then carded, you then spun the wool into wool, you then were given some handmade wooden needles, and slowly you learnt to knit, and then you knitted this sort of terrible, lumpy old flannel. I mean, I loved it. And I was really good at that. So I was teacher's pet in handwork room, and therefore had sort of quite a status. So I didn't feel as if I was failing, and that gave me a lot of confidence.
Because I was going to ask you, because obviously Lucy is, very skilled at textiles.
Yes.
Was that a ton of research, or is that a secret passion of yours?
I was trying to find things for both the girls to do as their jobs that weren't our jobs, because I just didn't feel that was interesting. It's interesting that I gave Bea the job of being a writer, and she's actually sort of become a writer, but I wrote that before she started writing her own stories. She's always a good writer, but this is a new venture for her. I wanted to play with reality. I wanted Bea to be the one reflecting back with her writing. So I was looking around for something for Lucy to do. And yeah, that felt just naturally right for her to be someone who made things. I did do quite a lot of research on that, because much as I love making things, I don't unfortunately do it very much. So I went and spent a day actually with a textile maker, and she told me about, finding, buying calico from wolfins and making your handmade dyes and hanging them and cooking them up on a huge pot on a terrace. And I really thought I would have loved that life, but somehow, and I have done a lot of that in my life, but not, oddly enough, since I really threw myself into writing, maybe there's just only so much you have to create, how much energy for creation. Because much as I want to make things, I didn't, my son had a baby last year and I did knit the most beautiful jacket for him. So that was a lovely thing. It's the first time I've made anything for a while. And I got a lot of pleasure from that.
So you're a granny.
Yes. It's
Oh,
lovely.
how is that?
It's just gorgeous. Yeah.
Is it a girl or a boy?
A boy.
Oh, we're over time, so I'm just going to ask you one more question, which is, what have you read lately that you've loved that you'd recommend?
Gosh. Well, just again, I've been reading so much recently, partly because I've been traveling, and that's a really nice way of, one of the great pleasures of traveling is you have so much more time to read. So when I flew back and forth on both those long flights to Australia, I was reading the Helen Garner diaries,
Oh, I
which are
love them.
just fascinating. And
Love
then
them.
there she was at Byron Bay, and there she was walking along. Oh, so
Oh,
that was
she's
a total,
amazing. I
yeah.
love her
So
so much.
that's been also, it's so tantalizing because in my diaries, which I don't write all the time, but I'm always sort of laboriously explaining everything as if to who? I mean, no one's going to, even I can't bear to read them, but she just gives you a tiny overhead sentence, a little something she's noticed through a window. And then it starts to become utterly gripping. I mean, cleverly, it turns into a suspenseful story. I've also just today finished a really gripping book called Nesting by Roisin O'Donnell, an
Oh,
Irish
yes,
writer.
I haven't read that. You recommend?
It's utterly, it's honestly, I couldn't sleep the first night I started to read it. I thought I'll only be able to read this book in the afternoons because it's so, um, what's the word? It it gets under your skin and it's so destabilizing in its frightening element. Um, yeah, it's very, very cleverly done. It's really a book about
Oh,
the coercive control relationship, but you are on those eggshells. It's as if you are amazing.
oh, I have to have a look because I noticed it was longlisted for the Women's Prize, but it wasn't shortlisted, and then I forgot.
Ah,
So I shall have to take that out. Oh, I'm so glad you're a Helen fan. I am obsessed with Helen, and I'm obsessed with her just getting more recognition outside Australia.
she's a
It's,
real star in Australia. I have to say, when I was
yeah,
there, I
she's
read Monkey
huge.
because I hadn't read that, and I was in Melbourne, so I sort of felt I was in all those places. So that was extremely satisfying. And going into Tiamo's, going into all those places in Fitzroy and Carlton that she talks about. Yeah, it's really nice.
Well, thank you so much for fitting us in, Esther, and for still being awake. I really, really appreciate it. And I hope that I'll see you in the next couple of days, that would be a
See you
real
in
treat in the
Edinburgh.
writer's room. Yeah,
Definitely.
thank you so much. It's been really lovely. And
Well, thank you,
um,
and thank you to all the people who've been listening in. I can see your smiling faces, some of you. It's really nice. Thanks so
thank
much.
you. Good night. Thank you very much, everybody.